Hi everyone, if you enjoy what I do, then I think you'd enjoy my short collection of short stories and new paranormal thriller, available now on Amazon. Please make sure to subscribe and consider becoming a Patreon. Enjoy the video.
A man has been fined for dangerous driving after moving a car on top of another car?
Not too long ago, I made a video eviscerating Cyberpunk 2077 for how difficult it was to get running properly on my PC, but after managing to get it stable and subsequently spending, let's just say, more than a few hours pretty much glued to it, I think it's safe to say that I have some more thoughts. Now, while I do stand by a lot of what I said previously, none of it really seems to matter anymore, given that Cyberpunk is, without a doubt, a masterpiece of writing, world building and storytelling, which engaged me in a way I'm not sure any game has before. Right, off the bat, Cyberpunk wasn't at all the game I expected it to be, and ends up leaning far more towards the tone of the original Blade Runner, in that it asks for big questions, even bringing into question the nature of existence, rather than simply being some stylistic neon-saturated shooty bang-bang. And while there is certainly enough of that to go around, the deeper aspects add so much more to the world, elevating it above the kind of generic RPG it so easily could have become. Now, one of my more tenuous complaints have been the fact that Cyberpunk throws a lot of stuff at you, and that half of that stuff was entirely superfluous. I feel that I can clarify now that it was superfluous to me, and what I thought was the game packing in as much as it possibly could just for the sake of it was actually some cunningly subtle class system that allows you to organically choose your own path, making it so that you can spec into whatever you want as much or as little as you feel like, letting you mix playstyles to your heart's content. Sure, the early game is set up in such a way so that you get a basic overview of pretty much everything, which can get a little overwhelming, but once you get a bit of cash and find a good ripperdoc, then the world's pretty much your oyster. In a word, once you get over the extensive choices available to you, it is quite simply freedom, a concept that crops up again and again in both the mechanics and story of Cyberpunk. Personally, I started off as a discount Doomslayer before realising that bullet time was a thing, at which point I took up the sword and ascended to some sort of samurai demon of death. Quite fitting really, considering who you hang out with for most of the game. So, I could go on about the mechanics for quite some time considering that I was still getting tutorial messages into my 45th hour, but that's not why I'm here. No, I want to talk about the world of Cyberpunk, the people who inhabit it, and how Night City has become more real to me than maybe any other game world I have ever inhabited. You are V, and pretty much everything about you is indeterminate until certain choices are made, at which point you will be thrown into one of 3 distinctly different intros, and I don't just mean that superficially. Depending on the background you choose, you're basically a completely different person. Naturally, these different starting points end up in the same place, but I'll be damned if the game isn't already going above and beyond literally every other intro I've ever played. I mean, hell, it beats sitting through a dragon attack for the 17th time, that's for sure. V, however, whatever you make of them, is merely a lens through which we experience the real star of the show, Night City. The independent self-governing city-state where dreams go to die is a hotbed of corporate control, corruption and violence, but also the chance to become a legend, or at least die trying. Its bustling streets are filled with 1,000 different stories, with every alley and mega building offering a new experience, unique encounter, or quippy comment from one of the city's denizens. Even beyond the bustling city itself, and into the arid wastes of the Badlands, there are no end of secrets to be found, in the form of nomad bands, shady dealings, or quite simply the quiet of a place beyond the barrage of constant advertising and corporate propaganda. Now, while fast travelling is in the world of Cyberpunk, I think I only ever actually used it one time, opting to drive everywhere myself, simply because the city was so vibrant and alive that driving was a pleasure rather than a chore. For instance, where in other open world games, it can be fun to hoof it for the first few hours, discovering side quests as you go, but once you mark a good handful of main locations on the map, then you end up bouncing between them, turning in quests at a breakneck speed, and largely forgetting about the generally empty world outside. Not true with Cyberpunk, given that there's always a few gigs or side jobs along your way, and considering that a lot of side gigs spiral down into their own quest lines, it means that you'll end up chasing the rabbit more than the main quest, which, believe me, is a good thing, for reasons I will address shortly. Now, I could go on all day about how the driving is enjoyable, with a smorgasbord of different cars to try out, each with the ability to tune into some pretty fantastic radio stations, but in my opinion, the key reason why driving or even walking around Night City is not in any way a slog is simply because of your phone. Although it's not as robust and potentially addicting as your real-life mobile phone, you get enough calls and texts backing up while you're on missions so that driving around gives you a chance to call people back and answer messages. And while it's not much, the option to call up a tune while driving, just to shoot the shit, can really immerse you in ways I've never before experienced. In fact, I've left NPCs waiting after arriving at a quest location before now, just because I'm discussing the finer points of sentience and self-actualization with a robot car. Speaking of which, I've played a lot of games, and oftentimes, even recently, the characters within the world are either treated as parodies of reality, or are nothing more than talking heads in service of a very small main cast. Bear in mind, however, that even competently written characters are no guarantee of quality, given that everything rests on the ability of the voice actor to deliver a decent performance. Now, there are standout games, i.e. The Last of Us and my narrative favourite, The Walking Dead, but neither have the sheer scope of Cyberpunk. What I'm ultimately trying to convey then is how incredible it is that every single character in the game is written and performed to absolute perfection. From the leading cast to a nobody on the street complaining about their job. From a literal Hollywood star to a YouTuber whose dick is on fire. Not only do the characters in Cyberpunk feel real for the world in which they live, but they become real to the player. As V develops friendships and rivalries, so do we. We become invested in these people, we care about them, and when something may or may not happen to them, we grieve. The whole thing about being able to call them up whenever just to chat, or drive over to visit, only serve to deepen the connections the game serves to create. Now, it's all fine and dandy to have sunshine and rainbows all the time, but what really creates a compelling, real character is hardship, turmoil, and not always being on the same page. And I don't think anybody embodies this more in Cyberpunk than the man of the hour himself, Johnny Silverhand, played by none other than Keanu Reeves. So, I'm not gonna lie, the main thing which sold me on Cyberpunk was the fact that Keanu was in it. However, I went in fully prepared for him to turn up for 5 minutes and then bail, never to be seen again. You see, I've played Bethesda games, where they hire the likes of Patrick Stewart and Liam Neeson, only for them to have about 4 lines of dialogue and then die. And sure, Keanu was participating in the promotion of Cyberpunk, spawning one of the most wholesome memes ever in the process, but that didn't necessarily mean he was in the game for any length of time, did it? Well, let's just say that there's a reason why both I and half the internet are in love with the guy, because not only does he seem like one of the nicest souls to ever grace the planet, but he did not half-ass or phone in his performance one little bit, having, from what I can tell, the most lines in the damn game next to the voice actors for V. Not to spoil anything, but he is an ever-present companion, acting as a guide, adversary, and eventually friend. More than that, he's the crux on which the entire game stands, a mythical figure of sorts who you can take at face value or choose to explore in more depth, if only you put in the legwork. There seems to be a trend of sorts emerging in modern video games where the side quests you complete are not just random tasks done in isolation, but contribute to the main story itself, fleshing out the world in ways not otherwise possible. And as far as I'm concerned, this is only a good thing. However, I've not seen it implemented as organically as in Cyberpunk. Sure, you can flesh out the setting of your game in a separate questline, or have to play a roam around completing jobs until they're strong enough, or gained enough trust of some arbitrary NPCs to head to the final boss, but to truly weave the story of those side quests, the choices you make within them, into the main narrative must be a headache of proportions I am not capable of imagining, let alone rectifying. I mean, no wonder this game took so much time, money and effort to complete. Sure, there were just as many standalone side jobs, which act as levity or a portal into seeing just how messed up Night City is, but there are also quests which could frankly be games unto themselves, or even chopped up and repackaged as DLCs by less scrupulous publishers. Instead, they're all here, allowing you to delve into the seedy underside of a city, save or punish those who are deserving, and get to know your new friends. Because if you're ever going to succeed in Night City, then you need people by your side. In some ways, what Cyberpunk achieves in having you get to know the characters and complete jobs for them is almost like an evolution of Mass Effect's loyalty missions. That's not all, however, as without a lot of these rabbit hole side quests, there would be entire communities, locations and events you would completely miss out on. In fact, in some cases, decisions within these quests can open up or lock you out of entirely different paths, giving you the ever-present sense of not necessarily missing out, but of what if. Then there are the romances, and I'm typically one to shirk these sort of interactions for the simple reason that they seem largely crowbarred in, and have some of the cringiest dialogue imaginable. Not to mention that usually it's just a 5-minute scene with absolutely no future impact on the game. Again, however, this is where Cyberpunk's writing really shines, as while there is a single scene for each of the romanceable characters, which is very not appropriate for younger audiences, the romance between V and their special chum builds organically across the questline, with playful flirting and special moments which even continues after that scene, with a more affectionate demeanour and the kind of texts you might expect from an average couple. Quite simply, the side quests you choose to undertake and how you go about them can have a profound effect not just on the world, but on V themselves, and even change the very ending of the game. Games will frequently tout how your choices matter and how they have more endings than they know what to do with, but I feel with Cyberpunk that this is actually true. Now I imagine most people watching this, if you still are, have played the game to completion possibly multiple times, but I want to put a spoiler warning up just in case, because I feel compelled to talk about the ending in a little more detail, so make sure to head for timestamp on screen if you don't want the entire ending ruined, and you shouldn't because it's something you really need to experience by yourself. Okay, so you may know that in all, Cyberpunk has 5 endings, each with slight variations, again depending on your choices. Some may say there are 6, but the secret ending is pretty much just a harder version of one of the others, so personally I don't count it. However, without doing any side quests, that number is reduced to only 2 somewhat unappealing endings. Take the easy way out, if you know what I mean, or work with the corpos. Although complete the right side quests, and 3 more paths will open up to you. And this is largely why I wanted to talk a little more about the endings, because remember when you first chose your V's background? Well, it is in my opinion that each of these backgrounds links logically with one of the endings bar 2. Now, the 2 I speak of are naturally the suicide ending, what I would consider the bad ending. I mean, after everything V has fought for, it seems completely out of character just to end it. And Johnny's ending, where you allow him to take control of your body and go on living while V is relegated to an existence in cyberspace. The other 3, despite having their own names, are what I see as the Nomad, Street Kid and Corpo endings. Naturally, I would see the ending where V teams up with Arasaka to be the Corpo ending, indicating that even after everything that has happened, V is still a Corpo at heart and can't bring themselves to trust anything other than what they've known their entire life. The Nomad ending would be where V puts their trust in Pan Am and becomes an Aldecado, gaining back the family which they thought they had lost and escaping Night City for good. Finally, the Street Kid ending would be the ending where V still thinks they have something to prove to the world and attacks Arasaka, either with Rogue or by themselves, going on to forsake the ones who had come to care about them, still in pursuit of becoming a Night City legend, the very thing that got their best friend killed. To me, each of these endings seen in this way are almost poetic, with V ultimately returning to what they had always been. No matter what ending you choose though, it transpires that V still only has 6 months left to live, and even though some epilogues have a hint of hope, you are left with the unmistakable bittersweet notion that it's not the time that really matters, but what you do with it. Cyberpunk has an undeniable degree of replayability, with different background side quests and endings to explore. However, upon completing the game, I was left with the feeling that I didn't want to. The game was quite frankly amazing, but given that so many people throughout speak of escape, that Night City has chewed them up and spat them out, I was left believing that my ending was the true ending, and I didn't want anything to change that. It is a testament to the quality of the writing, however, that as I was sat there deciding the fate of V, the soul-wrenching music telling me that this was indeed the end, that I became genuinely emotional. Not just for the fate of these characters, which I had come to know and care for, but for the fact that I was coming to the end of this amazing experience. And just like David Tennant's Doctor, I didn't want to go. Yeah, I can play the game again, there's even a whole new expansion coming out soon, but never again will I experience it in quite the same way. Never again will I be able to play it for the first time. Granted, I got off to a rocky start with Cyberpunk, but after living a life in Night City, getting to know it and its people, it quickly became one of my favourite games, leaving me with an indelible experience which will never fade away.